This is the Educational Triage Podcast. Welcome. We invite you to come along with us on an exploration of interviews, issues, and other exciting and relevant topics in education, especially alternative education. They say alternative education is a laboratory for mainstream education. Why? Well, join us every week and listen in as Philip Summers
Aloha.
and I, Tony Hunt, jump in feet first to discuss issues that may affect our classes, students, communities, as well as our teaching. Please subscribe if you enjoy and find relevance in what you experience here. And if you haven't left a quick review, please do. We appreciate your candor and insights so we can improve as we move forward. Now, let's see what's on board today.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Educational Triage. This is Tony, and I am, of course, joined by the indomitable Philip.
Aloha.
And
Happy to be here.
today, we're going to take on two different issues. And we're going to try to keep everything down to no more than 20 minutes for each issue. That
All right.
sound good?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Go.
The first issue that we're going to look at is student voice. And the second one is disrespect in the classrooms and disrespect towards teachers. So, student voice. I was reading something somewhere, maybe it was on Twitter, and they were talking about how should we be allowing students a voice in how schools are run, in the scheduling, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I was hearkening back to the old days when I first began in alternative ed. And one of the things that we had was we had a student council, and the student council ran everything with the students right there. And of course, you have a smaller group of students. So you don't have, let's say, 1,800 students. You have maybe, I believe we had something like maybe 80 students at the time. So we had a group of about 7 or 8 students who would meet, and they would meet with the director of the program, and they would voice their concerns, and then they would meet with everybody else, and they would voice their concerns with them, and they would try to get everybody on board with some different solutions that they had.
Right.
So the best effects, and after reading the literature, the best effects that come from having something set up where students actually have a bigger voice, that help with scheduling, that help with discipline, that help with policies, even food, whatever, is there's far more engagement, there's far more empowerment. You've taken a lot of disenfranchisement away because now they're invested, because now the school has become theirs.
Sort of. I would think open it bigger. If you want to enhance the student voice, then open up the structure, the understanding of the structure to the kids at an earlier age, and let them know that by the time middle school hits, they're going to have more responsibilities as a group, and they'll be like officers or student councils. And by the time that happens in middle school, high school then will evolve into almost a community. If you can do that community thing, then they understand their roles. It will actually come to an even better functioning group.
I think we're in parallel universes right now.
Kind of. I'm thinking,
Because I'm not talking about middle school. I'm talking about alternative schools.
yeah, and well,
And
I'm
I'm
talking
not
about
talking
schools in
about
general.
mainstream. We can talk about
Oh,
mainstream.
alternative? Or
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Okay, never mind.
You understand what I'm saying?
I do.
Because if we start looking at what we're doing in the smaller schools, I suppose if you had a smaller school, that
Yeah.
would work.
That's exactly what you need is smaller communities for it to work.
Right. So if
Exactly.
you have a
Yeah.
smaller community, because
Yeah.
in
That's
a
just so
larger
hard to
in
do.
a larger school, you're always going to have the people that run for student office, and
Yeah.
and you still have your disenfranchised students who don't feel as though anybody really cares about them anyway, and they're completely checked out, and they're already um, I don't know what you would call them, but they are the kids that are on the fringe. They're
Yeah.
the ones that are falling through the cracks. Now, what I'm saying is those kids that are falling through the cracks, that are on the fringe, if they are brought in and they find that they have a voice, how do you coddle that out of them? I don't know, but there's got to be some way, because in an alternative school that is an effective one, they're they're made to feel welcome, wanted, needed, heard, and valued.
Yeah. I was, you kind of caught me unawares. I actually had guest taught in a alternative today, but it was a larger venue. And when you were speaking of this earlier, I was thinking in that larger context.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was thinking about how you build these relationships and da 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 da. And then you go, wait, hold it, time out. I'm thinking of alternatives. And I thought, oh, yeah, if you do have those relationships, then what you do is, of course, you have that structure built. You don't have to build to break down barriers so much. Then you can invest in the students, and then you can kind of guide them along as far as that goes and build their voice. You're right. They do feel an investment in the community, an
Mm-hmm.
investment in their voice. Yeah, they can say something and it's a grievance, but it's not, for lack of a better word, a bitch. It's like, stop forming your grievances as complaints and start forming them as solutions. Start affecting the community in a positive way, not in a more immature way. You know what I mean? That sort of way. That's like a true voice of reason, not a voice of complaint. That
I think
you can do that in a smaller environment.
right,
Yeah.
and the entire process has to be learned.
It does. And it also, I was just thinking of this too. In those groups that we used to have formed in class discussions, they were much smaller and it was more inviting. And they were,
Mm-hmm.
some of the groups went off, some opinions kind of went sideways, but the group was kind about it. And they go, I think what you mean is this instead of that's crazy, which is what you'll kind of get in some classrooms if they get out of control.
Right. So you're also teaching active listening.
Yes.
You're
And
teaching
kind listening. Yeah.
right, and you're
Yeah.
also teaching empathy. You're teaching,
Yep. Yeah.
well, everything that you need for SEL. You're learning how
Yeah.
to work within a
Community.
group dynamic and how to make people feel as though they can be disagreed with and still be respectful.
There was some things too about the struggles. They would put some struggles forward, and some kids would have more of a struggle with the topic than others, but they'd kind of form together to share it. I enjoyed that.
Hmm.
Um,
And I know that we had we had some really deep conversations. The students wanted to talk about race,
uh-huh.
and this is back in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And we had some talks about race. And it was really interesting to hear what they had to say. And then there were some elements that they wanted to leave people with,
Hmm.
just to kind of uh, masticate and chew on in their brains. And then afterwards, we as a staff, we actually stayed after much longer for, I don't remember how much longer,
Yeah.
but we listened and we had a discussion with each other on it. And it was actually very valuable
Hmm.
for us. And I know that the students were far more empowered and there was a lot more that happened. Did it change anybody's life? I don't know. Did it change their perspective? I believe so, because there were some issues that were going on in the community at that time.
Slow and fast. Did it change it quickly? Maybe no, but did it change it slowly? Yeah, you just said
Mhm.
it did.
Right,
Yeah, it added things. We change incrementally, all the time.
right. And so the students felt that they had a way to communicate with each other.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting because just the way that they spoke with each other, the way that they interacted, but they
Mm.
also talked about things that they really wanted. So they talked about classes that they really wanted.
Yeah.
One of the big things that we could do there was if you were comfortable teaching a certain kind of class, you were allowed to do it.
That was important. We could do that.
And so I taught mythology and I taught biology, anatomy and physiology. Um, I also taught choir, which turned into more of a music appreciation class. Uh, it's really hard when
Yeah.
you have opposing gang members in a class that
Yeah.
where you're supposed to be singing music and they don't want to sing.
And there's not a tenor among them. My gosh, what are you going to do? Anyway, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there was. I mean, they wanted to sing along with their songs, and so that's what we did. And then we
Yeah.
talked about the music, and
Right.
but
I got to teach African American history, orienteering. Oh man. Quantum theory. We were talking about
mhm,
things based upon that the double slit experiment, and what really blew up physicists' minds in the 20s and 30s and teens, and the whole string theory thing. And you don't have
mhm.
to be a physicist to understand just that it's quite a riddle and things like that. I taught about the space race, the Apollo programs, and the race to the moon. Yeah.
Mhm. And then later on, I was teaching. Well, I went to other programs, and so I was able to teach different languages.
Yeah.
But then I had to run the gamut of all the core curriculum and PE and art and a lot of others. But having the students actually voice what it is that they want
Yeah. They wanted to learn this stuff.
and giving them a voice makes it their community. And when you're talking about alternative kids, and I'm thinking too about schools that I mean, I know Texas has discipline oriented alternative ed, and so do a lot of other states. And so when you're talking about these, even if you're in a technical or a vocational high school, you still want to have something where the students actually do have a voice. And whether or not that comes from having small groups, maybe small advisory groups. Let's say that you, Philip, you have a class that you're attached to, and maybe there's 20, 25 kids in that class, but you have a good relationship with them, and you're able to get them all to talk, and everybody else in the building is able to do that as well. Then they can put forth their voices and they can designate somebody to go up and advocate for them
Hmm.
in front of the rest of the people in the school. And so you don't have, I think what I'm trying to get away from is where you have cliques like the Plastics
Right.
and the others that you see in all these movies, um, who dominate everything and
Right.
govern the culture. You want the students to have the culture, but it's it's learning all about what it is to be a community and that they have a voice because that'll give them more agency outside of the school as well.
Yeah, it gives them some, well, control over their learning. What I failed to mention about the classes that I taught in the varied arrays that I had, gosh, I used to have a list of them because I couldn't recall, and there's so many of them. We had morning, afternoon seminars, and so we teach core in the morning, and then the afternoon would be up to us, and we'd have the kids give us suggestions, or I'd suggest them. But I had lots of suggestions. I did like that was where I did painless Shakespeare
Hmm.
because I told the kids I don't know jack about Shakespeare. Really, I admitted it to them, and they goes, "We don't." And I said, "What if I like looked into it and I came back with you?" And that's where we came up with like the ones that I like to teach, the ones that are good. No, the ones that actually were basic enough. If you really get into it, I mean, Shakespeare's wonderful. It's like Macbeth is like I told him he's like an evil guy. He goes crazy. Da da da. It's like in the end, you just no man born of woman will challenge him. But guess what? Here comes Macduff, and he's dead. And they love it, and they finally learn to understand and appreciate Shakespeare.
Hmm.
And there it is, we all learned together. So I was teaching courses like that, and they actually suggested things, so they had a lot of agency.
Right.
And
When I taught Shakespeare at my one room schoolhouse,
yeah,
the students kept demanding Hamlet. I hate Hamlet.
I like
And I
Hamlet.
did my best, but they demanded we keep doing Shakespeare. And so we ran through The Tempest, Othello, Romeo and Juliet, Richard III, Hamlet. We did so many different works.
I'm kind of jealous. They probably would have taught me a lot about that stuff. I've
They
yet to go
loved
through
it
the
and
array of it
they
all.
they became very good at it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason Shakespeare is Shakespeare, but it can't be read by a ninth grader. If you're
Well,
introduced to Shakespeare by it being read, Romeo and Juliet being read by your classmate, you've been cheated.
here's the thing.
Yeah.
Shakespeare was not meant to be read.
No,
Shakespeare
not
was
at
meant to be
all.
performed. So
Yes, yes.
So what I would do is I would put on a recording and then they would follow along.
Oh, I give them a full blown DVD,
Nope,
great
nope,
performance
they
of
got
it,
that
man.
later.
Oh
But
no, they get to see the full blown glory of a performance right in their face, like
nope, I made them listen
blood
to
and
it.
gore, and you name it. Yeah, the
I made them
laughing and the
listen to it.
joking, and
And then what they did, because they love just listening to it, because that gets their minds going and it opens up their imagination. Having everything laid out in front of them takes away it
are you
puts
kidding me? You're
everything.
talking about the snowboarding, pedal to the metal, balls to the walls generation, man. This
But
is the flow generation. It's
so
computing power doubles every 2 years. They want it all now. Yeah,
well,
they're not
they didn't get
animals.
it. And so as a result, and then I learned this from my professor at university. I broke up the play into certain sections. And then I told groups that they had to perform certain sections and that they were put into groups and then they had to perform them. And then we would have a mini Academy Awards for different different things. So they would all put on the play. And it was so much fun. And then they would do that. And then for the movie, I would find a movie that was based on that Shakespeare play, but wasn't that Shakespearean play. And then we would watch that afterwards and they would compare the two.
If that was their voice and they wanted to do it, it was great then. Yeah.
Oh, they loved it.
Oh, then there it is.
So, but
Yeah.
what I'm talking about
And it
is
works. Yeah.
how is the schedule formulated at the school? Do you have
Yeah.
students who participate in the hiring process?
No.
And if not, why not? Because if everything is coming from the adults, then how do students really feel as though you're looking out for their best interest? And while it
Yeah.
may seem a little intimidating, it's a huge learning process for them as well. And it also gives them a lot more credence, and it also puts their foot firmly on the ground there so they can say, this is my school.
It's true.
And
That's
they're
a big leap.
experiencing that
You have to have
school.
a smaller school for that. That's for sure.
You do. You
You
do have
do.
to have a smaller school for it. But there are so many. So I like the idea of having the academics in the morning, and then in the afternoon that there's something else after lunch. So when I talked to Jennifer Achari, her program, they do creative arts, they do PE, they go bike riding, they do all these activities, and the students get to choose what they're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so if a student wants to work on their project, then they can do that as well. It's just pretty much open. And
that's a big part of it. That's the voice too.
Mm-hmm.
I get to choose what I do with my afternoon.
Right.
Yeah, that's huge.
So having that, but they're still on campus.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's where you do a lot of the community building, and that's where you have more interactions that are happening with students. Today, if you take a look at all the schools that we have in Finland, they run a half a day program.
That does a lot of good to people. Yeah. Or for people, rather. Yeah.
And rather than teaching SEL, why not do it? And that way in the afternoons, you have things like they can be doing their clubs, they can be doing their sports, they can be doing all these other activities. And so by the time they leave for the day, they've already had maybe their volleyball and their football practice, their cheerleading practice, they've had their clubs, they've done everything, and everybody can leave. And they don't have to go home and do homework.
There it is.
Nobody wants to go home and do homework. Teachers don't want to go home and do homework.
Mm-mm.
But that it should be a community experience. Maybe that's what's wrong with schools. But, let's give students a voice. Let's give them a chance and possibly start figuring out ways to make that a more effective form of, I guess what I'm trying to say is put that into the calculus of how we run the schools. So we don't just have the adults making all these top-down decisions and they're just little cogs.
Well, okay, so you're talking and I'm thinking, my mind is wandering ahead, and we're dedicating 20 minutes to one topic, 20 minutes to the next.
Right.
And thinking like a teacher, I'm thinking, and if I was a student and I was in a system where no one listened to me, I'd be disrespectful.
And that's exactly where we're going to go now.
Hey everybody, how are you doing? I'm just here to remind you to hit that subscribe button and also to share this podcast with your friends. We are now in over 41 countries around the world, and we are growing. We don't always hit it right, but we still have a conversation that is relevant to the policies and what's going on now today in education, and especially alternative education. So we can only grow and we can only do better if we hear back from you. So be sure to leave us a review and send us an email, educationaltriage@gmail.com. So back to our show.
I would be aggravated. I would be frustrated. I noticed it today too. I was in an afternoon, morning sort of separated thing, and the afternoon kids were done. They were definitely in a different behavior mode than the morning kids, and they were challenging, and they were like, it was funny. It was very strange. My mind started sort of thinking about what we were saying is, yeah, they would really do well if they had a choice in the afternoon to do it, to go to another classroom and do some other classwork, or to hang out with a friend for a moment, or to have some choice. That would be a real stress reliever for a student in a school. And then if they didn't get that choice, I could see where they would be sort of aggravated and a little bit cranky and disrespectful. Yeah.
Because they're just tossed into a place that they're told that they have to do these things. They're going to be graded on it. They have the afternoon. They have the carb. What do they call that? What do they call that?
I don't know. After the lunch nappies or something.
Something like that. The carbohydrate.
I never knew.
Blues or
whatever it was. I was just done with the day anyway. But you're right. You mentioned that they have to get the grade, and was doing that job yesterday and today, and that was exactly the drill in the morning. Now here's our new grading system, and here's how we're going to do it. And I thought, oh wow. I was looking at some of the kids. Some kids were wearing sunglasses, and I thought, that's interesting.
Wow. Well, here's something else, and this is for student buy-in as well.
Yeah.
And yes, it does play into the amount of respect that students have in the classroom, because if they feel that they're a part of it and they're being listened to, why would they disrespect it? And if their peers are also right there, then yeah, there has to be something. So, because if they are interested, or if they have some kind of a foothold inside the class, then they're going to be looking for those things. So, you know, if you're going, let's say that we're doing English, and yes, we're going to be taking a look at X, Y, and Z. Well, then you start differentiating your curriculum based on what the students tell you that they want to do with whatever it is. Right. Now, I was told that we had to read the book Night. And so what I did was I read the book out loud to the students in class. I could have had them go home and read it, but how many of the kids are actually going to go home and read it?
They're
not that many. No. So we talked about it. We had great discussions in class. And if they missed it, they knew what pages we covered, because that was all online.
Yeah.
And they kind of picked it up, and people helped them out. And so it was, when I teach, I like the kids to be in a community, and everybody plays an essential role in some way. So from my reading, a lot of the disrespect that we see in the classroom comes from kids are not interested. B, kids have no clue what you're talking about, because they are missing certain elements of information. So it has absolutely no meaning for them whatsoever. Or it could be they just don't want to do it. And that's when you get a lot of the clowning. Or they may have this perception that you are not the teacher that they should have. Where do they get that? Their parents.
That's an interesting theory. I mean, that you may be right. Yeah, I know that as a guest teacher, there's a certain behavior they've taken on.
Because they like to see what they can get away with.
They do, and so I have a certain approach to it. You know, I know that I'm an outsider, and I know that I'm not. You know, I know there's a certain amount of respect that's given and earned, but there's also a territory. You know, I'm in their territory, and I'm not going to just say do it because I said so, kind of thing. And at the same time, I'm also not stupid, and there are natural consequences to their behaviors, and they have to face those. And it's kind of like, I'm not going to be Mr. Garvey. You want to go to war? You know, it's not going to be like that. So I am not going to be, a hard ass, for lack of a better word. But at the same time, when I go out of my way to be reasonable and respectful, and I get, absolutely nothing in return, but disrespect, it's like, no, that's just not even human respect. You're not even, that's just immature behavior. You're just playing me to play me. You're acting, I'll say that now you're acting like a second grader. To second graders, that's okay. But high schoolers, that's not okay. You're acting like a second grader.
Or even a third or fourth grader.
Yeah, really, it is. You're acting like a second grader, second grader. I've said that to second graders, and I kind of laughed to myself. But they're second graders, for goodness sake. Yeah. So it's interesting, but it's their territory, and they'll group up. That's another thing, right, too. So I know that it's sort of a strategy they'll use, but they do check out, and there's a certain sort of a bravado that they'll put on, like, it's sort of vulnerability. I'm a failure, and I know it. Prove me right. And it's like, no, but you're making it hard. Yeah. I like to kind of get through the veneer. But you're right, though. Some of the parents really, I saw this once where a kid was in a playground. There was a bigger kid, and he went right up between the two kids, and he told they were like under the age of 6, and he said, "If any kid gives you any trouble," and he points to the other kids, "you kick them right there," and he pointed to the lower, the kid's nether region kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, "Wow." You're teaching them to be ignorant and really aggressive at a very young age, aren't you? It's like, and these two, like children are looking up this adult. I'm going, wow, he's relating to you too quite well, isn't he? It's like, oh my goodness. But yeah, there's just childish behavior everywhere. And
Was that was a student or an adult?
no, that was a playground I was once at, and I just watched this adult teaches basically get at the level of a 5-year-old and teaches 5-year-old how to deal with a 6-year-old. And he was doing really well relating to the two of them. And I thought, oh my goodness. And you see that behavior in the high school sometimes in the disrespect level.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh my goodness, I cannot possibly get this low, to get in there, and that kind of, like I said, like when I was guest teaching and I said, they were uttering, the S bomb and the F bomb. And I said, hey guys, my favorite thing to say, it's like grandma's dinner table. You don't say, hey, grandma, pass the F and potatoes, set and setting, And when I said that, they go, oh, S this and F that. And they said it louder and louder and, just doubling down on it. And I went, wow, you're just doing that just to do it now.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, you win. You absolutely positively win. I am not going any lower than that.
I just look at them and I say, you kiss your mama with that mouth?
Yeah, it's like, yeah, I can't go lower than that. You win.
Or I just stop and I look at them and I say, I cannot believe that word left your lips. And sometimes that's all you have to say. But after the pandemic, there seemed to be a lot of anger directed towards teachers.
Yeah, it was anger. It was like, how dare you cross
but there was still a lot of disrespect towards teachers in everything that I've been reading. I mean, I take a look at these articles and it's like, wow, that sounds pretty recent. And then I look and it's about 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Which is very pre-pandemic. So it's not something that's new. But on the other hand, it's just something that happens. And so sometimes parents will tell their kids, I hated English when I was growing up. I was never good at English. Oh, math, I don't like math. Here's what it is. If a student is in your class and you're asking them questions, you can always turn that around, because I always tell kids, you haven't learned how to do math yet. You haven't learned how to do these ideas yet, but we keep trying and we get there, and it'll click at some point. English, you're not good at English. What do you mean you're not good at English? Can you speak? They say, well, of course I can speak. And it's like, well, then you understand the language. So what is it? And that's when we start coming up with, how do we figure out a way for a student to prove that they understand the material?
Or how do we reach them where they are? I always tried to get them
exactly
at their form of expression, and then have them excel at that, and then sort of have that open them up.
Mm-hmm.
Get them to go, oh, I can do that. Now take that and do something a little bit over to this way or that way, and make that express itself in a different form. You can do it. Yes, you can.
Right. Because sometimes disrespect comes out of fear. It comes out of anger, which many times comes from fear and frustration.
And it just comes from not being heard. I can see the kids, the bells, they're in these classes. I feel it too. Listen, I'm ADD. If I didn't go into alternative ed, I probably would have quit a long time ago. I would have. I just hate it. ding. 55 minutes is too long a time for these old bones to be sitting around, and it's too long a time for the young bones to be sitting around, and they know it, and they go, gosh, I'm going crazy. And some of these lessons are, frankly, it's make work. It always was, and they don't want to do it, but they do it, and some of them don't mind doing it. But some of these kids are like, I know it's kind of not meaningful, but they just don't do it. They just refuse to do it, or they just don't go to school, and it's like, oh my goodness, and they just cop a tude. And it's like, yeah. And then, when someone comes along, they don't quite know, and they say, hey, you should do this. They go, hey, F you. It's like, oh, well then, because you don't have any connection to them.
Right.
Yeah.
But
you're just another adult.
But they also see the frustration coming out onto the teachers.
Yeah, and the teachers
and
are
I
like in this thing too. Yeah.
I bumped into a teacher the other day. I was out for a walk, and I bumped into one of my former colleagues.
Right.
And I looked at them and I said, how are you doing? And they just shook their head, and they said, this year has been so much tougher than last year.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, holy cow, how can that be? And they looked at me and they said, I don't even want to go there. I was in a really good mood, and now I got to shake this off, and I got to finish my walk. And I just let them go. I felt bad, but
oh no.
Yeah, but I was talking to another former student who said, are things really getting that bad? And they said that teacher was always so happy-go-lucky. And I said, yeah, that's how bad it is. And they said, whoa, I'm glad I graduated when I did. And I said, yeah, because I bumped in, because a student was driving by, saw me, and honked and stopped. But it was a weird meeting of the minds.
That was, that's crazy, because I got frustrated too. And today I was as I was leaving the last period of the day, this last class was just a bear. And so I finally closed. They go crowding to the door. Everybody hates that. And soon the door opens, and they slip out, and I go, guys. I walk to the door. I go, everyone back in the door, please, back in the door. Multiple times. I go, this is the 10th time in the door. I go out there and I go, in the door, and I close the door. I go, let's just stay in the room. Nobody open the door. And I walk away, and 30 seconds later, the door opens. And I said, how did the door open? And everyone goes, I didn't open the door. And I went, oh, and then 30 seconds later, the bell rang, and they go out the door, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm out of my breath. And this girl's in the corner, and she's got heavy makeup, and she hasn't said anything the whole period, but I'm kind of talking, and I made eye contact with her in some of my stories, and she never really acknowledged me, but she was kind of, making eye contact. And she turns around, and she has this little purple heart. And she says, you have a good day, okay? And she kind of had like an I'm sorry look on her face. It was like, thank you. I will. I will. I mean, I have. Thank you. And she kind of smiled at me. She had goth makeup on. She was really dark looking, but she had a big kind of smile on her face. It's like, oh, because I knew I was connecting with her, but she didn't say a darn thing until she said that at the very end of class. And she went,
wow.
Little purple heart.
I had two students I had two students at one point who were two of the biggest class clowns. That just drove me crazy. But then during lunch, they would go out and they would get me a milkshake. And they would bring it to me.
Yeah.
Now, they would always put something special inside the milkshake. And 8 out of 10 times it was a pickle. So I would have a vanilla milkshake with a pickle in it. Well, actually it tasted pretty good. It was kind of the sweet and savory kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so they would giggle and they'd say, you like your milkshake? And I'd just tell them, that was actually really good. Thank you. And they'd say, eh. So it became a running joke. So every day I'd wait for my milkshake with the pickle in it. And once in a while, they'd put something else in the middle of it. But yeah.
Okay. It wasn't anything like, oh, it's weed. It's like, oh my God, what?
No, this is back in the 80s.
Oh, it's like, work on what? It's acid. What? That would be horrifying.
Yeah,
Oh,
it would be.
God.
So sometimes your class clowns can actually be some of the sweetest kids in the class. I had another kid that was constantly late every day, just chronically late.
Oh, no.
And I was talking to another teacher who said, you have so-and-so in your class, don't you? And I said, yeah. They said, yeah, his mom just called. And I said, yeah. And he said, she's on the warpath.
Oh, dear.
And I said, really? He said, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. She said she's given the husband enough money to bail her out of jail in case she gets,
Oh, no.
just in case she gets arrested. So I'm sitting there, and we have conferences that night, and all of a sudden I see this woman, and she goes walking by, because we used to do these sort of communal conferences where we would be like this huge circle with all the teachers at tables. And she stopped and she looked at me and she goes, you hunt? And I said, yeah. And I bet you're so-and-so's mom, aren't you? Yeah, how'd you figure that out? I said, I was told to be on the lookout for an angry mother.
Oh, no.
She goes, oh, we're going to get along. And she sat down. We had the best talk.
Did you?
We really did. She and I had the best time for the rest of that year. It was great.
Wow.
But, you have parents like that,
yeah.
and then you have parents that pretend. And so you wonder what's going to happen with some of these kids. But by the same token,
Yeah.
I believe that if you have good relationship with your students, and sometimes you just can't, but you have to have a sense of humor with them. And we don't know what's going on in the students' lives, because remember, 1 to 14%.
Yeah.
We don't know what's going on outside. We don't know what's happening at the parents. We don't know whether or not the kid witnessed something at home. I had a kid whose mom dropped dead. The father turned around, looked at them, and said, you don't have her to save you anymore, and grabbed the kids and sent them off to school. They had no time off for grieving.
Well,
you have kids, but these are kids who seem like just regular kids who are just making it through the day, who've been put into these living hells in their own lives. And so you don't know what's going on. You don't know how out of control their home environment is. And so you try to give them that safety that they can have there at the school. But you can only have that safety too if you have an administration, if you have the administration that's going to look out for you and the students as well.
Yeah, it's a fine line there. I mean, you don't want to suggest to kids anything, and you don't want to run around stepping over lines, but at the same time, you care an awful lot about these kids.
Right.
You just do.
And so you just keep that in mind. And you never stop giving them the respect, even if they're not being respectful to you. And I already had to deal with something not too long ago where a teacher was being incredibly disrespectful to certain students, and then broke confidentiality with one of the students. And that just set the student off even further. And then they demanded that student give them a public apology. And they were furious because I said, yeah, that's not going to happen. I think the two of you need to talk because they're willing to apologize to you. And they said, no, I refuse to be yelled at. And I thought, okay, you're in the wrong environment. You should not be here.
Yeah, that's not the way you deal with it.
You got to get rid of this hierarchy that I am the teacher and you are the student and you will do as I tell you to do. we're a community. We work together. We respect each other. And that's how it goes. Sometimes we may disagree, but then we take a look at where we went wrong and how you went wrong. And we kind of work things out. And that teacher was unwilling to do that. And the consequences weren't good.
Respect goes both ways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so by giving students voice, by respecting them constantly, and it's not always going to be pleasant, but we try to figure out a way to make them feel safe, valued, heard, wanted, needed, then we have our viable community. And so with that, I am going to say we have run over time. So Philip, I want to say thank you.
Thank you.
And to all of our listeners, make sure that you subscribe. Make sure that you come back next week. So until then, have a wonderful week.